Welcome back, and I hope you and your family are well at the moment. So what we're going to do today is have a quick video on mains electricity. So you know about DC circuits, I'm sure. Those are the ones with batteries and bulbs, and they have a plus and a minus, and they have electricity always flowing from plus to minus. And you remember the plus side is always labelled red and the minus side is always labelled black. Well, today we're going to look at mains electricity, which is very different. The sockets on your wall, and here's an extension lead, you've all seen them. They have these 3 pins, and obviously if you're watching from outside the UK it's different, but for my students they'll all know that there's a 3-pin socket in the UK, and they produce electricity that's come from a power station, so not from batteries. And the voltage on these is much, much higher, well over 10 times higher, anything that you used and played with in my laboratory. And so mains electricity is absolutely lethal. It's really, really dangerous. And we don't, in the classroom, ever build any circuits that involve bare wires with mains electricity, because you give yourself a huge electric shock, or you'd end up killing yourself, which is not what you want to do in a classroom. But you can get a lot of power from mains electricity because the voltage is very high. And so what I want to tell you about today is why are there these 3 holes in the socket on the wall, and therefore why do our plugs have to have 3 pins? And what's in the cable here? So there's probably 3 wires because there's 3 pins. And if we're not going to use batteries with DC, which was red and black, we're going to use alternating current from power stations. And this is electricity that comes in a sort of push-pull way, rather like waves going up a beach and then giving you more energy as they come back down the beach. So with DC, the electricity flows plus to minus in one direction, and AC, it goes backwards and forwards. And to let you know it's AC electricity, the wires in here are going to be different colours. So it's really important that we know what the colours of the wires are and where we wire them to in the socket on the wall and the plug on the end of the piece of wire. So I said to you earlier on, you should never ever play with mains electricity. It's extremely dangerous. And I've had a few moments even as someone who should know what they're doing. So to make sure we're always safe with mains electricity, some of the things they might ask you in the exam would be, what sort of things do you need to do to make sure you're safe? Well, the insulation needs to be good on the wires, it needs to be well insulated. These sockets and plugs are all made of plastic. And if the wall sockets on the wall have got a metal case on them, then we need to make sure that that metal case is always connected to 0 volts, so we can't get a shock if we touch it. And I'll show you in a minute how we go about doing that. The other thing you don't want to do is ever poke things into these sockets other than the plug that's designed to go in there. And you could run a risk of getting a shock if your hands got near to the socket if they were wet. So it's pretty obvious you shouldn't use wet hands on mains electrical devices. And in the UK it's really interesting because they don't have these plugs in the bathroom. It's just too dangerous, it's too much of a risk. So how do you turn on the mains lights in a bathroom? Well, you've got 2 options. The switch is outside, where they hope you'll use dry hands, or the switch is on the roof of the building, and there's a big long piece of string attached to the switch, so your wet hands can never get anywhere near it. So those are a few of the things you need to think of when you are behaving safely around mains electricity. Right, now, the other thing you need to know is what the wires are in mains leads or mains wiring. And I've got a piece of mains cable here, and there's nearly always 3 cables inside. And let's have a look at the construction first. Well, the first thing you notice is there's an outer insulation, and that holds the 3 wires together. But it also means that if ever that becomes damaged or you get a break in it, you've got a second layer of insulation on each cable to get through. So there's a sort of extra layer of safety. Secondly, the 3 wires in there are coloured, and they have coloured insulation around them. and you need to know what those colours are. So we've got one wire that's blue, one wire that's brown, and one wire that's green and yellow striped. And it's really interesting why it's got green and yellow stripes, because if you were colourblind, you might struggle to separate green from blue, and you might struggle, though I'm not sure, to separate brown from the green or the blue. So they stripe it, so I think, or so I'm told, so colourblind people can definitely realise which one is the green and yellow striped one. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to tell you what these three wires do and how they carry electricity to something you've plugged into the wall. So, have you memorised the three colours of the wires? Let's quickly talk about them. The green and yellow one's a really interesting one. That one, if you plug it into your device, maybe your mobile phone charger or something, if there's a connection to it and you were to follow it all the way out of the house, it does something very strange. It goes out of the house and straight into a pole into the ground, a copper plate and a copper peg that goes into the ground. So this wire, wherever you find it in your house, actually goes all the way to the ground outside. And you can always touch the earth, you can always touch the ground, because it's at 0 volts. So interestingly, that cable never has a voltage on it. It always has 0 volts on it. It's a safety cable, and we'll talk a bit more about that one later. The other two are a bit more complicated. These are the ones that go through your house wiring and go outside and end up via some complicated transformers and big tall power lines on pylons going to the power station. And they have specific names. The live one is the brown wire. And the live wire is at a very high voltage. It's around 220 volts or a little bit more. And you should definitely never touch that one. You're going to get a nasty electric shock. And the neutral wire, which is always blue, they usually keep that at 0 volts. But that's another one I strongly recommend that you don't touch. Now, you know that the earth wire is always going to be safe because it's always at 0 volts because it's connected to the ground outside. So let's see which pins on a plug these three wires go to. So I've got a mains plug here, and you'll notice that there are two pins here with a bit of insulation around them. Most mains plugs are like that now. And this pin here doesn't have any insulation around the outside edge. It's actually quite interesting because you'll also notice this one's slightly longer. So we'll talk about which cables go to which pins. So I'm going to take the back off this plug. And again, I sort of recommend you don't do this because it's something you need to, be trained to do. And you'll see that in the back of the plug, you'll see the coloured wires. And they only ever go to the same places in every mains plug. So the top pin, that's the one that didn't have the insulating ring on it, is the earth. And the earth pin goes to ground outside, and it's yellow and green. This one, on the left-hand side, is the blue wire, and that's the neutral, and it always goes to that pin. And then on this side, we've got the brown wire coming in on the right. That's the live wire, and in between the live wire and the connection that goes to your electrical device, so the electricity comes in here, in between it is a gap, and in that gap is a fuse. And that fuse is a piece of wire that's very thin, and if the electrical device has a fault and draws too many amps, it'll melt the wire in there and automatically switch off. And you'll have to replace the fuse, and you'll have to repair the fault. So, have a look at the mains plug. It's really important you understand that there's a clamp over here to hold the outer insulation in. There is a blue wire with no bare copper wire, the neutral, going into the left-hand side. And then there's a wire on the right-hand side that's the live, and that's brown and has the fuse. And the top pin is always the earth, and that's the one that is yellow and green striped. Now, there's a little story I wanted to tell you about this, because when I was a kid and it was Christmas or your birthday, and you bought something that was electronic and you had to plug it into the mains, that's how it always came. It always came with bare wires at the end. Well, you can imagine that Christmas Day was spent trying to wire on one of these plugs, or you didn't have one, and people were getting it all completely wrong. They were getting the colours the wrong way round. They were doing all sorts of dangerous things with the wires. So it's now law that if ever you buy anything that plugs into the mains plug must be on it, and it must be pre-wired. So I hope you now know the colours of the wires for mains wiring. You'll notice there's no red and black. That's for DC. This is an AC system. And if I hold that plug up like that, that would connect into here. So if you look at a wall socket, you know the top is the earth. This side on your left is the neutral, and on the right is the live. And try and remember, what colour is that, what colour is that, and what colour is that one. So what we're going to do now is put the back on this plug, and I'm just going to talk to you very quickly about why we have this long earth pin. So it's tight on there. So there's the long earth pin, and why we have this insulation around the live and the neutral pins. Well, the earth pin must connect first because it's a safety device. So when you plug in, the earth pin goes in first, and it actually opens a little gate, a little window on the neutral and the live. Secondly, these have little bits of plastic around them because people like me, and maybe you with small fingers, can you imagine if you started to unplug and you got your fingers under here? You could actually touch a bare bit of metal, and that finger of mine at the moment could touch the live, but thankfully it's touching a little bit of insulation around it. Now, very quickly, let's remind ourselves what the earth's for. It's connected to ground, so it's always at 0. And if you plug anything in that's got an earth pin that's metal, the wire will go to that device. Should we say it's a washing machine? And the earth pin wire will connect to the case of the washing machine, the outside bit, the metal bit. And so you know that never mind what happens, that metal case will always be connected to earth. So if you touch it, you'll be safe. It will always be at 0 volts. You must have an earth wire if the device that you're connecting to, the mains, has a metal case. So things like microwave ovens, things like dishwashers and washing machines, where if there was a fault and the metal case got connected to the live pin, it wouldn't remain live for very long. Electricity would flow down to the earth, blow the fuse, and the case would always remain at 0 volts. So you're safe. So just before we finish, one or two of you who are eagle-eyed will go, but hang on, my mobile phone charger has 3 pins on it. Yes, it does. And the earth pin's made of plastic. So how can it possibly be a safety device? Well, with things like mobile phone chargers, you can get away with not having the earth pin, or at least not having an earth pin that's metal, because you have to have the pin, because that is the one that plugs in first and opens these 2 windows. It's a sort of safety device. But your mobile phone charger is made of plastic. So if you touch the case on your mobile phone charger, it can't ever be electrified because the plastic's an insulator. So there's no need to connect the earth pin, which is connected to the ground outside your house, 0 volts. There's no need to connect that to the case of the charger because it never could become electrified. It's plastic anyway. So on a lot of small devices, you still have 3 pins, but the earth pin at the top is plastic, purely just to open the windows on the main socket. So I hope you learnt a little bit more about mains wiring then. The sort of things you need to know is it comes from power stations, it's a much higher voltage, you need to know why there are 3 wires, you need to know their colours, you need to know where they fit in to a mains plug, and it's also good to know why do we have an earth pin and what's it used for. Anyway, I hope that was a useful lesson, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.